Baby saw a bear cub crying behind a gas station. What Baby did next changed 2 lives. The mist rolled in thick that evening, wrapping around the old gas station like a blanket made of whispers. Ethan Marshall gripped the steering wheel a little tighter as he pulled into the empty lot, the headlights cutting through the fog in 2 pale beams that seemed to disappear into nothing. His 4-year-old daughter, Lily, sat in the back seat. Her small fingers pressed against the window, drawing shapes in the condensation that had gathered there. The gas station looked abandoned at first glance, but a single flickering light above the pumps told him it was still open, barely hanging on to life in this forgotten stretch of highway. The air felt heavy, not with rain, but with something else, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up just slightly. It wasn't fear exactly, more like the feeling you get when you know something important is about to happen, but you can't quite put your finger on what it might be. Ethan turned off the engine, and the sudden silence pressed in around them, broken only by the distant hum of electricity from the old neon sign that read, "Last Stop Gas," in letters that had seen better days. He looked back at Lily, who was now unbuckling her seatbelt with the determined concentration that only small children possess when they're focused on a task. "Stay close to Daddy, okay, sweetheart?" he said, though something in his voice carried more weight than usual. She nodded, her brown eyes wide and trusting, completely unaware of the strange tension that seemed to hang in the misty air around them. The temperature had dropped suddenly when they'd stopped, and Ethan could see his breath forming small clouds as he stepped out of the car. The concrete beneath his feet was slick with moisture, and somewhere in the distance he could hear the drip, drip, drip of water falling from the station's rusted gutters. Lily climbed out after him, her tiny pink sneakers making soft splashing sounds in the shallow puddles that had formed in the cracked asphalt. She reached for his hand automatically, but then something made her pause. Her head tilted to one side, and the way it did when she was listening to something only she could hear. "Daddy," she whispered, and there was something in her voice that made Ethan's stomach tighten. Someone's crying. He listened, but heard nothing except the buzz of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic on the main highway, miles away from this lonely spot. "There's no one here, baby," he said gently, but Lily was already pulling away from him, her attention fixed on something beyond the edge of the building where the darkness seemed to gather more thickly. The sound came then, so soft that Ethan almost missed it entirely. It was like a whimper, but not quite human, carrying a quality that made his chest ache without understanding why. Lily took a step toward the corner of the building, then another, her small form starting to disappear into the shadows. "Lily, wait," Ethan called, but his daughter was already rounding the corner, drawn by something he couldn't see or understand. He hurried after her, his heart beginning to pound with the particular terror that only parents know, that fear of losing sight of your child even for a moment. The area behind the gas station was darker than the front, lit only by the weak glow filtering through the mist from a distant streetlight. Old cardboard boxes lay scattered around, soggy and falling apart, and the smell of rust and decay hung heavy in the air. That's when he saw them. Lily was crouched down near a dumpster, her small hand extended toward something that made Ethan's blood run cold for just a moment before confusion took over. It was a bear cub, no bigger than a medium-sized dog, its dark fur matted with moisture from the mist. The creature was making soft, mournful sounds that were unmistakably the crying Lily had heard. But what struck Ethan most wasn't the presence of a wild animal so close to his daughter, it was the way the cub was looking at her, with eyes that held something he'd never seen in an animal before. There was intelligence there, yes, but more than that, there was sadness, deep and profound, like the creature was carrying the weight of some terrible loss. "Lily," come back slowly," Ethan whispered, trying to keep his voice calm even as every instinct screamed at him to grab his daughter and run. But Lily didn't move away. Instead, she sat down right there on the wet ground, crossing her legs and looking at the cub with the same serious expression she wore when she was trying to understand something important. "He's lost his mommy," she said simply, as if this explained everything. The cub moved closer to her, and Ethan tensed, ready to spring forward, but the animal's movements were slow, almost careful, like it was afraid of scaring her away. When it was close enough, it laid its head on Lily's knee, and she began to stroke its fur with gentle, practiced movements, the same way she petted their neighbor's old golden retriever. The moment stretched out, impossible and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Ethan found himself frozen, watching his 4-year-old daughter comfort a wild bear cub, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The mist swirled around them, creating an almost dreamlike quality to the scene, and for a moment, Ethan wondered if he was actually awake, or if this was some strange dream brought on by the long hours of driving. But the cold air biting at his face and the dampness seeping through his shoes told him this was real. Impossibly real. The cub made another sound, softer this time, almost like a sigh, and Ethan noticed something odd about its fur. There was a marking on its shoulder, faint but visible, that seemed to catch the light in a way that didn't make sense. It looked almost like a constellation, a pattern of lighter fur that formed a shape he couldn't quite identify. "We have to help him, Daddy," Lily said, looking up at him with those big brown eyes that could melt his heart on the coldest day. "We can't leave him here all alone." Ethan's mind raced through all the logical reasons why they absolutely could not and should not take a bear cub with them. It was illegal, dangerous, completely insane. But looking at the creature, so small and vulnerable, and seeing the way it trusted his daughter completely, something in him shifted. He thought about calling animal control, but his phone had no signal out here, and the nearest town was at least an hour away. The gas station attendant, if there even was one, was nowhere to be seen. They were alone with this impossible situation, and somehow, Ethan knew that this moment was important in a way he couldn't explain. He knelt down slowly beside Lily, his knees protesting against the cold, wet ground. Up close, he could see that the cub was younger than he'd first thought, probably only a few months old. Its eyes, when they turned to look at him, held that same strange intelligence he'd noticed before, and for a moment, Ethan could have sworn the animal was studying him, measuring him somehow. "Hey there, little guy," he said softly, extending his hand slowly, palm up, the way he'd been taught to approach unfamiliar dogs. The cub sniffed his hand, its small nose cold and wet, then made a decision that would change everything. It stood up on shaky legs and walked the few steps to Ethan, pressing its small body against his leg in a gesture that was unmistakably a request for protection. The weight of responsibility settled on Ethan's shoulders like a physical thing. He looked at Lily, who was watching him with complete trust, believing absolutely that her daddy would know what to do. He looked at the cub, so small and alone in this harsh world, and he made a decision that went against every logical thought in his head. "Okay," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "Okay, we'll figure this out." Lily's face lit up with a smile that could have powered the entire gas station, and she clapped her hands softly, careful not to startle the cub. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered, and in that moment Ethan felt like he'd done something right, even if he had no idea what that something was. Getting the cub to the car was easier than Ethan expected. The animal seemed to understand that they were trying to help, and it followed them willingly, staying close to Lily's side like a faithful dog. Ethan opened the back door of their SUV, half expecting the cub to balk at getting inside, but it climbed in without hesitation, curling up on the floor at Lily's feet. She immediately started talking to it in that soft, sing-song voice she used with all animals, telling it about their house and her toys, and how she would share her teddy bears if it wanted them. The absurdity of the situation hit Ethan as he started the engine. Here he was, driving through the night with his daughter and a bear cub, like something out of a children's story that had taken a very strange turn. As they pulled away from the gas station, Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror and saw something that made his breath catch. For just a moment, he could have sworn he saw a figure standing at the edge of the mist, tall and still, watching them leave. But when he looked again, there was nothing there, just the swirling fog and the fading lights of the station disappearing behind them. The cub made a soft sound from the back seat, almost like it was responding to something, and Lily giggled. "He says thank you," she announced, as if this was perfectly normal, as if 4-year-olds could understand bear language. Ethan wanted to tell her that bears don't talk, that this was all very unusual and they needed to be careful, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the peace in her voice, or maybe it was the strange feeling that had been growing in his chest since they'd found the cub, but he kept quiet and just drove. The road stretched out before them, empty and dark, lit only by their headlights cutting through the persistent mist. Ethan had planned to drive straight through to his sister's house, where they were expected for a family reunion, but now he wasn't sure what to do. He couldn't exactly show up with a bear cub in tow. His sister would have a heart attack, and his brother-in-law would probably call the police. But as he drove, watching Lily in the mirror as she gently petted the cub's head, he realized that something larger was happening here, something that didn't fit into the normal patterns of life. The cub hadn't eaten anything, hadn't even shown interest when Lily offered it some of her crackers, but it seemed content, almost peaceful, as if being with them was enough. About an hour into the drive, something strange happened. The cub, which had been lying quietly at Lily's feet, suddenly sat up and looked out the window. It made a different sound now, not sad, but almost urgent, like it was trying to tell them something. Lily leaned forward, pressing her face against the window next to the cub's. "Daddy, he wants us to turn here," she said, pointing to a small dirt road that Ethan had almost missed in the darkness. Every rational part of his brain told him to keep driving, to stick to the main road, to find somewhere safe and figure out what to do with the cub. But something else, something deeper and older than logic, made him slow down and turn onto the narrow path. The dirt road was rough, and the SUV bounced and jolted as they made their way deeper into what seemed to be a forest. The trees pressed in close on both sides, their branches scraping against the windows like fingers trying to get in. The mist was thicker here, so dense that Ethan had to slow to a crawl, straining to see more than a few feet ahead. The cub was standing now, its front paws on the seat, looking ahead with an intensity that made Ethan nervous. "Maybe we should turn back," he started to say, but Lily shook her head firmly. "No, Daddy, we're almost there. He's taking us somewhere important." How she knew this, Ethan couldn't fathom, but there was such certainty in her voice that he kept driving, following the winding path deeper into the unknown. The forest began to change around them. The trees, which had seemed dark and forbidding at first, now appeared to glow faintly in the mist, their bark shimmering with moisture that caught the light in unusual ways. Ethan noticed that the temperature in the car had changed too, growing warmer despite the cold night outside. The cub was making soft sounds now, almost like it was humming, and Lily was humming along with it, creating a strange harmony that filled the vehicle. Ethan felt like he was in a dream, one of those vivid ones where everything feels more real than reality itself. His hands on the steering wheel seemed to belong to someone else. Someone who was brave enough to follow a bear cub into the depths of a mysterious forest. Then, suddenly, the trees opened up, and they found themselves in a clearing. Ethan stopped the car and just stared, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. The clearing was perfectly circular, about the size of a baseball field, and the grass here was different from anything he'd ever seen. It seemed to glow with a soft, silvery light, as if the moon was shining directly on it despite the thick cloud cover above. In the center of the clearing was a pool of water, perfectly still and so clear that it reflected the sky above like a mirror, even though the sky itself was hidden by clouds. The cub was pawing at the door now, eager to get out, and Lily was already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Wait," Ethan said, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. There was something about this place that demanded quiet, demanded respect. He turned off the engine, and the silence that followed was complete. Not the empty silence of abandonment, but the full silence of a place that was very much alive, but holding its breath. He got out of the car slowly, his feet sinking slightly into the soft grass that felt warm despite the cool night. Lily climbed out after him, the cub jumping down beside her, and together they stood at the edge of something Ethan couldn't name but could feel in every cell of his body. The cub walked forward into the clearing, and Lily followed without hesitation. Ethan wanted to call her back, but he found himself following too, drawn by something stronger than caution. As they moved toward the center of the clearing, the air itself seemed to change, becoming thicker, almost tangible, like walking through warm honey. The cub reached the pool first and sat down at its edge, looking into the water with an expression that Ethan could only describe as longing. Lily sat down beside it, and after a moment's hesitation, Ethan joined them. The three of them forming a small semicircle around the edge of the impossible pool. That's when the water began to move. Not ripples from wind or disturbance, but movement from within, as if something was rising from depths that shouldn't exist in such a small pool. Ethan grabbed at Lily's hand, ready to pull her back, but she squeezed his fingers reassuringly. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered. "She's coming." Before Ethan could ask who she was, the water parted, and a shape emerged that made his heart stop and restart in a completely different rhythm. It was a bear, but not like any bear he'd ever seen or imagined. This creature was massive, easily 3 times the size of a normal bear, and its fur seemed to be made of starlight itself, shifting and shimmering with colors that didn't have names. The great bear moved with a grace that defied its size, water rolling off its cosmic fur in droplets that sparkled like diamonds before disappearing. Its eyes, when they fixed on the small group by the pool, held the weight of eternity. Ethan felt his knees go weak, and he might have run if Lily hadn't been holding his hand with surprising strength for such a small child. The cub made a sound, high and sweet, and the great bear responded with a rumble that Ethan felt in his chest more than heard with his ears. Then, to his amazement, the massive creature lowered its great head until it was level with the cub, and they touched noses in a gesture so tender it made his eyes burn with unexpected tears. "That's his mama," Lily said simply, as if this explained everything, as if cosmic bears emerging from mysterious pools was something that happened every day. The great bear's attention shifted to Lily then, and Ethan's protective instincts flared, but the look in those ancient eyes was gentle, almost grateful. The bear moved closer, and Ethan wanted to pull Lily back. But his daughter stepped forward instead, reaching out her small hand. The bear lowered its massive head further, allowing Lily to place her palm on its snout. The moment they made contact, something extraordinary happened. Light, soft and golden, began to emanate from the point where they touched, spreading outward like ripples in reverse, moving up Lily's arm and across the bear's face. Ethan watched in awe as patterns began to form in the light, the same constellation pattern he'd noticed on the cub's shoulder. The marks appeared on Lily's hand, glowing faintly before fading to what looked like a very faint birthmark, barely visible, but definitely there. The great bear pulled back slowly, and when it looked at Ethan, he understood somehow that this was a gift, a marking of protection and connection that would stay with his daughter always. The bear turned to the cub then, and they had what could only be described as a conversation, though no sounds Ethan could understand were made. The cub's entire demeanor changed, its earlier sadness replaced by something that looked like understanding, acceptance, and even joy. The great bear began to move back toward the pool, and the cub followed. But before they entered the water, both turned back to look at Lily and Ethan. The message in their eyes was clear. Thank you. Thank you for the kindness, for the trust, for being the kind of humans who would help a crying cub behind a gas station without asking for anything in return. Then they walked into the pool together, the water accepting them without a splash, and they sank beneath the surface as if the pool was infinitely deep. The water stilled immediately, returning to its mirror-like state, and the clearing fell silent once more. Lily looked up at Ethan with eyes that seemed older than her 4 years. "They had to test us, Daddy," she said, "to make sure there are still people who care." Ethan didn't know how to respond to that, so he just pulled her into a hug, holding her tight as his mind tried to process everything that had happened. When he finally looked up, he noticed that the clearing was beginning to fade, or maybe they were fading from it. The silvery grass was becoming regular grass, the pool was shrinking, becoming just a small pond, and the sense of otherworldliness was dissipating like morning mist. Soon, they were standing in an ordinary forest clearing, beautiful but unremarkable, with no sign that anything extraordinary had ever happened there. They walked back to the car in silence, Lily's hand in his, both of them carrying the weight of what they'd witnessed. As Ethan started the engine and began to carefully navigate back to the main road, he glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror. She was looking at her hand, at the faint mark that remained there, tracing it gently with her finger. "Daddy," she said quietly, "do you think we'll ever see them again?" Ethan thought about it for a long moment before answering. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly, "but I think they'll always be with us somehow. And I think that whenever we see bears or stars or mysterious places, we'll remember that magic is real and kindness matters more than we ever knew." The drive back to the main road seemed shorter than the drive in, as if the forest was gently guiding them back to their world. When they finally emerged onto the highway, Ethan was surprised to see that only an hour had passed since they'd left the gas station, though it felt like they'd been gone for much longer. The mist was beginning to clear, and stars were becoming visible through breaks in the clouds. Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat, her hand curled protectively around the mark on her palm, a small smile on her face. Ethan drove through the night, his mind replaying everything that had happened, trying to make sense of it and finally accepting that some things didn't need to make sense to be true. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan realized that their lives had been changed forever. Not in dramatic, obvious ways, but in subtle, important ones. They had been chosen for something, trusted with a secret that few would believe, but that would always bind them to something larger than themselves. He thought about the story he would tell his sister, how he would explain their late arrival, and decided that some stories were meant to be kept close to the heart, shared only with those who could understand that the world was far more mysterious and wonderful than most people ever realized. Years would pass, and Lily would grow up with a special connection to nature that her teachers would call remarkable, and her friends would call weird, but in a good way. She would always be the one who could calm frightened animals, who could sense storms coming before the weather reports, who would look at the stars with a knowing smile that made people wonder what she saw that they didn't. And sometimes, on misty nights when the world felt thin and permeable, she and Ethan would drive past that old gas station, now closed and crumbling, and remember the night when a crying cub led them to magic. The mark on Lily's hand would fade as she grew, becoming almost invisible, but it would always be there if you knew where to look. And sometimes, in certain lights, it would glow faintly, usually when she was near an animal in distress or when she was doing something particularly kind. It was a reminder, Ethan thought, of the night when they learned that the universe was paying attention, that kindness was noticed by forces beyond human understanding, and that sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to be part of a story that bridges the gap between the ordinary and the extraordinary. On Lily's 18th birthday, she would receive an anonymous gift, a small wooden carving of a bear cub with a constellation carved into its shoulder. No note, no explanation, just the carving and the absolute certainty that somewhere, in whatever realm they inhabited, the bears remembered them too. She would keep it on her desk through college, through her career as a wildlife veterinarian, through her own journey into motherhood. And she would tell her children, on misty nights when the world felt magical, about the night Grandpa Ethan stopped at a gas station and they found so much more than they were looking for. But all of that was still to come. For now, Ethan drove through the dawn, his daughter sleeping peacefully in the back seat, carrying with them a secret that glowed as softly and surely as the mark on Lily's palm. He thought about the great bear's eyes, ancient and knowing, and understood that they had been given a gift greater than any treasure. The knowledge that magic was real, that kindness created connections across impossible boundaries, and that sometimes the most important moments in life came disguised as small, crying creatures who just needed someone to care. The road stretched out before them, leading back to the ordinary world, but Ethan knew they would never be ordinary again. They had been touched by something cosmic and strange and beautiful, and that touch would ripple out through their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. He glanced once more at Lily in the mirror, at the faint smile on her sleeping face, and felt a surge of gratitude for whatever force had led them to that gas station, to that cub, to that clearing where the impossible became real. They had been chosen, he realized, not for any great destiny or dramatic purpose, but for something simpler and more profound. To be witnesses to wonder, to be proof that kindness could transcend species and dimensions, and to carry forward the knowledge that the universe was far stranger and more beautiful than anyone dared to believe. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the mist, and Ethan drove on, carrying his precious cargo toward a future that would be forever colored by this one impossible night. In the back seat, Lily stirred slightly, her hand opening to reveal the faint star-shaped mark on her palm, and whispered something in her sleep that sounded like, "Thank you." And somewhere, in a place between dream and reality, between the ordinary and the magical, a great cosmic bear and her cub moved through forests of starlight, carrying with them the memory of two humans who had shown them kindness when they needed it most. As they finally pulled into his sister's driveway, hours late, but somehow right on time, Ethan looked at the normal suburban house with its normal lawn and normal cars parked outside, and smiled. They would go inside, make excuses about traffic, eat breakfast with family, and pretend that nothing extraordinary had happened. But he and Lily would know. They would carry the secret between them like a warm stone, a reminder that the world was full of mysteries and that they had been lucky enough to touch one. And maybe, Ethan thought as he gently woke his daughter, that was the real magic. Not the cosmic bears or the glowing pools or the marks that appeared on skin, but the simple fact that a father and daughter had shared something impossible and would forever be bound by the wonder of it. Lily opened her eyes and looked at him with that same old soul expression she'd had in the clearing. "Did it really happen, Daddy?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked at the mark on her palm, faint but unmistakably there, and nodded. "It really happened, sweetheart," he said. "And you know what? I think it's still happening. I think every act of kindness, every moment of wonder, every time someone helps someone else without asking why, it happens again. We're part of something bigger now, you and me. We're part of the magic." Lily smiled, that bright, transformative smile that could light up the darkest night, and took his hand. Together, they walked toward the house, toward normal life, carrying with them the extraordinary secret of the night when they answered a cry for help and discovered that the universe was listening. Inside the house, Ethan's sister Jessica was already bustling around the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the family gathering. She looked up as they entered, ready to scold them for being late, but something in their faces stopped her. There was a glow about them, subtle but unmistakable, like they'd been touched by sunlight even though they'd been driving through the night. "You two look like you've seen something amazing," she said, half joking. Lily and Ethan exchanged a glance, a whole conversation in a single look, and Lily answered for both of them. "We saw stars, Aunt Jessica, so many beautiful stars." It wasn't a lie, not really. They had seen stars, just not in the way anyone would expect. The day progressed normally, with family chatter and children playing and adults discussing adult things, but Ethan noticed that Lily kept touching the mark on her palm, a secret talisman that connected her to something beyond this ordinary gathering. And he noticed, too, that animals seemed drawn to her more than usual. His sister's usually aloof cat curled up in Lily's lap and purred like a motor. A bird landed on the windowsill near where she was sitting and sang just for her. Even the neighbor's dog, known for being skittish around children, came to the fence to be petted by her gentle hands. It was as if the animal kingdom had received some sort of message, a notification that this small girl was special, was connected, was one of the few humans who had bridged the gap between worlds. That evening, as the family gathered outside to watch the sunset, Ethan's brother-in-law, Michael, was telling a story about a strange news report he'd heard. "They're saying there have been unusual bear sightings all over the region," he said. "Bears showing up in places they've never been before, acting calm around people, almost like they're looking for something. Wildlife experts are baffled." Ethan felt Lily's hand slip into his, and he squeezed it gently. They both knew what the bears were looking for, or rather, who. They were looking for the humans who had proven that kindness still existed, that the bridge between worlds was still crossable, that magic was still possible in a world that had forgotten how to believe in it. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Lily pointed to a constellation that looked remarkably like the mark on her palm. "Look, Daddy," she whispered, quiet enough that only he could hear. "They're watching." And indeed, as Ethan looked at the stars, he could almost feel that ancient cosmic presence, that sense of being seen and acknowledged by something vast and mysterious and benevolent. He thought about all the people going about their lives, never knowing that just beyond the edge of their perception, magic was happening all around them. He thought about the gas station, probably serving other travelers now, none of them aware that it had been the stage for something extraordinary. The gathering continued into the night, with food and laughter and the comfortable chaos of family, but Ethan and Lily existed in a bubble of shared wonder. Every now and then, they would catch each other's eye and smile, conspirators in the most beautiful secret. When it was finally time for Lily to go to bed, she hugged him extra tight and whispered, "Thank you for believing me, Daddy. Thank you for helping the cub." Ethan kissed the top of her head, breathing in the little girl smell of shampoo and sunshine, and now, somehow, starlight. "Thank you for teaching me to see magic, sweetheart," he whispered back. As the house settled into sleep, Ethan stood on the porch, looking up at the stars and thinking about everything that had changed in a single night. He thought about the people who would pass that gas station tomorrow, the next day, next year, never knowing what had happened there. He thought about the bears, cosmic and strange, existing in some parallel space just beyond human perception. And he thought about Lily, growing up with a mark on her palm and magic in her heart, destined to see the world differently than everyone else. It was a responsibility, he realized, this knowledge they now carried. Not a burden, but a gift that came with the obligation to keep believing, to keep being kind, to keep their hearts open to the impossible. A shooting star streaked across the sky, and Ethan made a wish. Not for himself, but for the world, that more people would stop when they heard crying, that more hearts would open to the impossible, that more connections would be made across the boundaries of species and dimensions. He thought he heard, carried on the night wind, a sound that might have been a bear's call, or might have been the echo of something deeper and older than sound itself. It was a reminder that they were not alone, that they were part of a vast, interconnected web of consciousness that included everything from the smallest insect to the most cosmic of beings. When he finally went inside and checked on Lily one more time, he found her sleeping peacefully, her hand with its starlight mark curled under her cheek. On her nightstand, arranged carefully, were her collection of toy bears, but now they seemed different somehow, imbued with new meaning. Among them was a drawing she must have made before falling asleep. 2 bears, one large and one small, walking into a pool of stars, and 2 humans, one large and one small, waving goodbye. At the bottom, in her careful kindergarten handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for the magic." Ethan felt tears prick his eyes as he looked at the drawing, understanding that his daughter had captured something profound in her simple art. He thought about the story they would never tell in its entirety, the experience that would become family legend but never family fact. Years from now, people would remember that Ethan and Lily had arrived late to the reunion, looking strange and wonderful, but they wouldn't know why. They would remember that something had changed between father and daughter that night, that they had become even closer than before, but they wouldn't understand the cosmic thread that now bound them. And that was okay, Ethan realized. Some stories were meant to be lived rather than told, felt rather than explained, carried in the heart rather than spoken aloud. As he prepared for bed himself, Ethan noticed something he hadn't seen before. On his own palm, so faint it was barely visible, was a mark that matched Lily's. He stared at it in wonder, understanding that he too had been changed, marked, chosen. The Great Bear had given them both a gift, a reminder that they were part of something larger, something that transcended the ordinary boundaries of existence. He thought about all the small kindnesses he would perform in his life, now knowing that each one might be a test, a bridge, a moment of magic waiting to unfold. He thought about teaching Lily to see the world this way, to always be ready for wonder, to never lose the ability to hear crying that others might miss. The mark on his palm seemed to pulse gently, like a heartbeat, like a promise, like a connection to something eternal and watching. And Ethan understood that this was just the beginning. The bears, cosmic and strange, had chosen them for a reason, had marked them as ambassadors between worlds, as proof that the miraculous was still possible. He and Lily would go through their lives carrying this secret, this responsibility, this gift. They would be the ones who stopped when others drove by, who listened when others couldn't hear, who believed when others had forgotten how. They would be the keepers of magic in a world that desperately needed to remember that magic was real. Tomorrow they would return to their regular lives. Lily would go back to preschool, where she would draw pictures of bears that her teachers would find unusually detailed and moving. Ethan would return to his job, where he would find himself more patient, more aware, more attuned to the small miracles that happened every day. But they would both carry with them the knowledge of what had happened on that misty night, the certainty that they had touched something infinite and been touched by it in return. They would know that, somewhere, in a space between spaces, a great cosmic bear and her cub moved through forests of starlight, carrying with them the memory of two humans who had answered a cry for help without hesitation. And maybe, Ethan thought as sleep finally began to take him, that was the real message. Not that magic existed, though it did. Not that there were cosmic beings watching over the world, though there were. But that the simplest act of kindness, the most basic human response to suffering, could open doorways to the infinite. That a father and daughter stopping to help a crying cub could become part of a story that spanned dimensions. That love and compassion were the true bridges between worlds, the real magic that made everything else possible. As he drifted off to sleep, Ethan could have sworn he heard, distant but clear, the sound of a bear calling across the cosmos, a sound that said without words, "Thank you, remember, believe." The night deepened, and the stars wheeled overhead. And in a small house in a small town, two humans slept with marks of starlight on their palms, forever changed, forever connected to something greater than themselves. And somewhere, in the spaces between what is and what might be, the bears moved through their celestial forest, knowing that the bridge between worlds was strong, that kindness still existed, that magic was safe for another generation. The story would continue, not in dramatic events or cosmic revelations, but in small acts of kindness, in moments of wonder, in the simple willingness to stop when you hear crying and to help without asking why. This was the gift the bears had given them, not just a mark, not just a memory, but a way of being in the world that acknowledged its mystery and met it with open hearts. And as the night turned toward dawn, as the world spun on through space carrying its cargo of dreams and possibilities, the mark on their palms glowed faintly. A reminder that they were never alone, that they were part of the great cosmic dance of consciousness and compassion that connected all living things. The cub they had saved was safe with its cosmic mother, but the connection remained, would always remain, a thread of light linking the ordinary to the extraordinary, the human to the divine, the small act of kindness to the infinite expanse of love that held the universe together. In her sleep, Lily smiled and murmured something that sounded like, "Forever friends," and the mark on her palm pulsed once, gently, in response. The bears, cosmic and eternal, heard her across the dimensions and sent back their own message of love and gratitude. And the night held them all, bears and humans, cosmic and ordinary, in an embrace that transcended understanding but not feeling, that defied explanation but not experience. This was their story, the story of a crying cub and the humans who helped, but it was also everyone's story, the story of how kindness creates magic, how compassion builds bridges, how love transcends all boundaries and makes the impossible possible. The first light of dawn began to touch the eastern sky, painting it in shades of rose and gold, And somewhere, a bear cub that had once cried behind a gas station played in fields of starlight. Forever grateful, forever connected to two humans who had shown that the best of humanity was still alive and well. And in their beds, marked by starlight and blessed by bears, Ethan and Lily slept on, carrying within them a secret that would color all their days to come, a reminder that the world was far more magical than most people ever knew, and that they had been chosen to remember, to believe, and to keep the door between worlds open through simple acts of love.